Someone said something to Bruce Lee that made a few people in the room look over. The comment wasn't loud, but it was meant to be heard. Bruce Lee didn't answer. He stayed where he was and kept doing what he was doing. It was one of those ordinary afternoons in the training hall on the second floor of an old building in Kowloon. The place wasn't built for show, bare concrete walls painted a faded white years ago, a couple of industrial fans turning slowly overhead, pulling the thick, humid air around without really cooling anything. Rubber mats covered most of the floor, patched in places where they'd worn thin from years of footwork. 3 heavy bags hung from chains in one corner, swaying slightly whenever someone walked too close. Along the far wall ran a long mirror, spotted and scratched, but still clear enough to check form. Windows high up let in slanted afternoon light, dust floating in the beams like tiny insects. 20, maybe 25 people filled the space that day. Not packed, there was still room to move, but enough bodies to make the room feel alive. A handful were regulars, young guys in loose t-shirts and shorts, some older students who came every week without fail. They knew the routines, knew where to stand so they didn't block each other. A few were working side by side on basic forms, repeating the same sequence over and over, counting under their breath. 2 pairs were doing light partner drills, one holding focus mitts while the other threw controlled strikes, the slap of gloves against leather punctuating the quieter breathing. In the back, 3 or 4 guys sat against the wall on folded towels, catching their breath, sipping from metal canteens, talking low about weekend plans or the latest movie. Then there were the visitors, 5 or 6 that afternoon. They stood out a little, different postures, different clothes, eyes moving more, taking everything in. One of them was this bigger guy, easily 6 feet, broad across the chest and shoulders, like he spent most of his time under heavy weights. He wore a sleeveless shirt from another gym, arms folded tight, standing near the door like he hadn't decided yet if he was staying. He'd been there maybe 20 minutes already, watching without speaking, shifting his weight from one foot to the other every so often. Bruce was off to the side, away from the main group, working alone. He wore plain dark pants and a simple top, sleeves rolled to the elbows, no rush in his movements. He was running through footwork patterns he'd done thousands of times, slow at first, feeling every shift of balance, then picking up speed without losing control. Eyes stayed forward, locked on an invisible point a few feet ahead, not darting around the room to see who was watching. His breathing was even, almost silent under the background noise. The big visitor had been staring longer than the others. You could see it in the way his head tilted slightly, the small frown that kept coming and going. Finally he spoke. Not a shout, his voice carried just enough to cut through the room without forcing everyone to stop. He said something about whether those quick, small steps and hand flicks could actually hold up when a stronger man closed the distance and used real power. He mentioned size again, how bigger frames carried weight that speed alone couldn't match, how some of this looked more like performance than practical fighting. He delivered it with that half-smile people use when they want to sound casual but still want the jab to land. His eyes flicked sideways after he finished, scanning a couple of the regulars, like he was waiting for someone to nod in agreement or chuckle along. A few heads turned right away. One student in the middle of a rep froze for half a second, mitt still raised. Another guy who'd been adjusting his stance glanced over, then back to his partner, but slower this time. The low conversations near the wall quieted, words trailing off. The room didn't freeze solid, but the energy shifted, split now, part still on the drills, part quietly waiting to see what came next. Bruce didn't pause. His feet kept sliding into the next position, hands following the same flow, pace unchanged. No flinch, no glance, no tightening of the shoulders. He just continued. A couple students paused mid-rep. One guy, lowering his guard in a partner drill, glanced over, mitts still up like he wasn't sure whether to keep going or wait. His partner noticed too, head turned halfway, eyes flicking between the visitor and Bruce, then back. A few conversations near the back wall dropped quieter, sentences left hanging as people leaned in slightly to hear better. The room didn't stop completely. Feet still shuffled on the mats. Someone adjusted their stance. A heavy bag creaked once from a leftover swing, but the energy tilted. Attention split now, part clinging to the usual rhythm of training, part quietly pulled toward the space between the big visitor and Bruce. Bruce kept moving. Same rhythm, same breathing. He didn't glance up, didn't tighten his jaw, didn't speed up to prove anything. His feet kept tracing the pattern he'd been on: slide step, pivot, shift weight, hands flowing through the positions in that deliberate way, like each motion was its own small world. If anything, his pace stayed exactly even, maybe even a touch smoother now, the way it does when someone's fully settled into what they're doing. The words from the visitor had passed through the air without touching him, without leaving a mark on his posture or his focus. People noticed that first. Not in a dramatic way, no one gasped or pointed, but you could see it in the small adjustments. One regular, who'd been repeating a form sequence, slowed his count, eyes lingering longer on Bruce's feet than on his own. Another student, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his arm, stopped mid-motion. Towel paused, watching. The visitor stayed planted where he was, arms still crossed, waiting. You could tell he was expecting something, maybe Bruce to turn, to step closer, to fire back with words, or even just a look that said, "You don't belong here." But nothing came. Bruce finished one side of the pattern, pivoted cleanly on the ball of his foot, started the other side without missing a beat. Still no change in expression, no shift in energy, no sign the comment had registered at all. The silence after the provocation stretched a little longer than anyone expected. Not awkward yet, but noticeable. The visitor shifted his weight again, left foot to right, then back, like the lack of response was starting to feel heavier than he'd planned. A couple of the visitors who'd come with him exchanged quick glances, one raising an eyebrow, the other giving a small shrug. But the regulars, the ones who showed up week after week, they weren't looking at the visitor anymore. Their eyes had drifted toward Bruce, watching the same sequence they'd seen him run before, but now seeing it differently, somehow calmer, more solid in the middle of the quiet tension. No one spoke up to fill the gap. No one laughed it off or took the visitor's side. The room just held there, split attention slowly settling in one direction. A student who had been holding pads for someone else lowered them slowly. He didn't drop them hard or make a scene, just let his arms relax, mitts hanging at his sides while he turned his body a little more toward Bruce. His partner noticed the shift, glanced over too, and after a second lowered his own hands, the drill forgotten for the moment. Another guy who had been shadowboxing near the mirror stopped completely, fists unclenching, shoulders dropping as he stepped half a pace sideways to get a clearer line of sight. The visitor shifted his weight once, then again, rocking from heel to toe like the quiet was pressing on him now, making the floor feel less steady. Minutes passed like that. Not long in clock time, maybe 3 or 4, but long enough in a room where everyone could feel something hanging in the balance. Breathing stayed audible, mats creaked under small movements, but the usual rhythm of training had thinned out. No one was pretending to keep going anymore. The pauses were real. The visitor tried once more. Shorter this time, less confident in the delivery. Another comment about how standing there saying nothing didn't prove anything either, how real fighters answered when challenged. He said it looking straight at Bruce, voice carrying the same volume as before, but the half-smile had tightened into something flatter. He waited again, eyes flicking to the sides, checking if anyone was still on his wavelength. Still nothing from Bruce. He transitioned into a different movement, something smoother now, a flowing sequence of steps and hand positions that looked effortless but took full attention to execute cleanly. His pace didn't hurry, didn't slow to show off restraint. It just stayed even. like the room's tension was background noise he wasn't tuned to. Sweat had started to show on his shirt in small patches, but his breathing remained controlled, in through the nose, out through the mouth, same as always. That's when the shift started to show more clearly. One student, the one who'd been sitting against the wall on a folded towel, pushed himself up quietly. No rush, no announcement. He just stood, brushed his hands on his shorts, and took 2 small steps closer to where Bruce was working. Then, another student turned his whole body toward Bruce, not the visitor, shoulders squared that way now. A third person, one of the regulars who usually stayed quiet during sessions, folded his arms and leaned forward slightly from where he stood, eyes fixed on the footwork. Conversations that had restarted in low murmurs fizzled out again. Someone started a sentence, trailed off, didn't finish it. Heads kept turning, one after another, until more eyes were on Bruce than anywhere else. The visitor noticed. His posture changed, arms uncrossed for a second, then recrossed tighter. He looked around the room once, slowly, like he was recalculating who was paying attention to what. No one met his gaze for long. The focus had begun to slide away from him, not because anyone pushed it, but because the person who hadn't reacted was the only one still fully in motion. The room held there a little longer, tension not breaking, just settling in a new direction. The visitor's half-smile had faded completely now. What started as a casual curve at the corner of his mouth had flattened into a straight line, then disappeared. He looked around the room slowly, eyes moving from face to face, trying to catch someone's gaze that might still be on him. Most weren't. A couple of the other visitors who'd arrived with him shifted uncomfortably near the door. One scratched the back of his neck. Another glanced at his watch like he suddenly remembered somewhere else to be. The big guy uncrossed his arms for a moment, let them hang, then crossed them again tighter across his chest, as if that might pull the attention back. It didn't. No one confronted him. No one stepped forward to say anything. No one laughed or whispered something cutting. There was no need. The attention had simply moved, the way water flows to the lowest point without anyone pushing it. People weren't staring at the provocation anymore. They were watching the person who hadn't let it pull him off course. Bruce kept going through the last part of the sequence he'd started earlier. His movements stayed precise but relaxed, a slow pivot, weight transferring smoothly from one leg to the other, hands cutting clean arcs through the air, then snapping back to guard. Every step landed soft on the mat, no extra force, no show. When he reached the end of the pattern, he paused for half a breath, just long enough to reset, then shook his arms loose once, fingers flexing open and closed, like he was shaking off water. He took a normal inhale, exhaled through his nose, and walked over to the side of the room, where a small stack of towels sat on a wooden bench. He picked one up, wiped his forehead and the back of his neck, folded it once, and draped it over his shoulder. Simple motions, nothing hurried. As he did that, more of the room turned with him. One student who'd been standing near the heavy bags stepped away from them entirely and moved closer to the open space where Bruce had been working. Another regular, the one who usually held the door for people coming in, left his spot by the entrance and walked over quietly, stopping a respectful distance away. A few others followed the same pattern. Small steps, no rush, just repositioning so they could see better or be nearer. The mirror along the wall caught it all, reflections of bodies shifting orientation, like a slow tide turning. The visitor stood there a second longer. His shoulders had dropped a fraction. The broad stance that had filled the doorway earlier now looked smaller against the background of moving people. He opened his mouth once, like he might try one more thing, but closed it without sound. Then he turned toward the door. No big exit, no slammed footsteps, no parting words thrown over his shoulder. Just a normal walk head level, arms at his sides out into the hallway. The door clicked shut behind him with a soft sound that barely carried over the mats. A couple of heads turned to watch him go, but only briefly. Most eyes stayed where they were. Bruce finished wiping down, set the towel aside, and one of the students who had stepped closer asked something quietly about the footwork in the last sequence. Voice low, respectful, the way people talk when they're genuinely curious and not performing for anyone. Bruce nodded once, turned toward him, and started explaining with small gestures, pointing to his own foot, demonstrating the angle of the pivot again, slow enough to follow. The student watched closely, then tried it himself. Another person joined them, standing just outside the circle, but close enough to hear and see. The room's energy settled back into motion, not the same scattered drills as before, but something quieter, more focused around where Bruce stood. The visitor was gone, and the space he'd tried to claim had filled in behind him like he'd never been there. The reversal wasn't loud or forced. It just happened because one person didn't chase the bait, and everyone else followed the steadiness instead. He never answered what was said. He didn't need to. The room already had. After Bruce started showing the footwork to the student who asked, a few more people drifted closer, not crowding just enough to form a loose half-circle. One guy crouched down a bit to watch the angle of Bruce's heel on the pivot. Another stood with arms folded, nodding slowly as Bruce demonstrated the weight shift again, slower this time so the motion was easy to follow. No one interrupted or asked for a big explanation. They just watched, tried the step themselves when he stepped aside, adjusted when he pointed out where the balance had slipped. The low murmur of voices returned, but softer now questions about the sequence, small comments on how the transition felt different when done this way. The energy wasn't forced back into drills. It settled into something steadier, more connected. The heavy bags in the corner swayed less. The fans kept turning overhead, pulling the same humid air around. Someone picked up the mitts that had been set down earlier and started a light warm-up again, but quieter, without the earlier snap. A couple of the visitors, who hadn't left with the big guy, stayed near the back, arms loose now, eyes following what was happening in the center, instead of scanning for an exit. The door clicked once more when another regular came in late, saw the small group, and quietly found a spot to watch rather than jump straight into his own routine. Bruce didn't stay in the spotlight long. After a few minutes of showing the pattern, he stepped back, gave a small nod to the student who'd tried it, and walked over to the bench to pick up his water bottle. He took a slow drink, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, then sat down against the wall for a moment, knees up, elbows resting on them, breathing fully settled. People kept moving around him, but the pull toward him lingered in the way they glanced over every so often, the way a few adjusted their own drills to mirror what he'd just done. That was it. No explosion, no showdown, no one declaring a winner. Just a moment where one person tried to pull the focus with a jab, and the focus slid away because the other didn't reach for it. The room didn't need to choose sides out loud. It chose by where the eyes went, where the bodies turned, where the next question came from. You've probably felt that pull yourself at some point. Someone says something sharp in a group, maybe at work, maybe with friends, maybe in a casual argument, and the air tightens. Everyone waits to see if you'll bite back, defend yourself, match the energy. The urge is there, strong, to swing words or prove something right then. Sometimes you do, and the moment flares up and burns out. Sometimes you don't. You keep doing what you were doing. Keep your rhythm. Let the comment pass through. And when that happens, the air changes in a way that's quiet but real. The weight shifts. Not because you won anything, but because you didn't need to play. That day in the training hall, the air changed toward the guy who stayed in his lane. Everyone else followed, without a word. The session went on like normal after that. People trained, sweated, packed up when it was time to go. But something small had settled in the room, and it stayed there long after the mats were swept and the lights turned off. Here is an expanded version of Part 2. The room begins to watch, stretched to around 650 words. Actual count, 649. to match the longer, more immersive style you requested for Part 4. It continues directly from the end of the expanded. Part 1. Keeping the calm, simple, human, certain tone, detailing the subtle reactions, the visitors waiting, Bruce's unchanged rhythm, and the first quiet signs of attention shifting. A couple students paused mid-rep. The one holding focus mitts for his partner let his arms drop a few inches, not all the way, just enough that the pads sagged toward the floor. His partner noticed the change, immediately froze with one hand still raised in guard, eyes flicking sideways to see what had pulled the attention. He didn't lower his fists right away, but the tension in his shoulders eased, like the drill had suddenly lost its urgency. Near the mirror, another regular who'd been shadowboxing in tight circles slowed his rhythm until his hands hung loose at his sides, chest rising and falling slower now, as he turned half his body toward the center of the room. A few low conversations near the back wall trailed off mid-sentence. One guy started saying something about adjusting his stance, stopped, looked over, then didn't finish the thought. The usual sounds kept going in the background, mats creaking under shifting feet, a heavy bag swaying once from a leftover push, someone's water bottle clinking against the bench, but the sharp, rhythmic slap of gloves on pads had quieted. The room didn't freeze entirely, it tilted. Attention split down the middle, some still clinging to their own movements, some already drawn to the space between the big visitor and Bruce. Bruce kept moving, same rhythm, same breathing. He didn't glance up at the visitor, didn't tighten his jaw or clench his fists, didn't speed through the pattern to show he wasn't bothered. His feet continued tracing the same line on the mat. Slide, plant, pivot, shift weight forward, then back, each step deliberate, each transition smooth. Hands flowed through the positions he was drilling. Low block, high parry, short jab, all at the same even tempo. No extra snap, no hesitation. If the comment had landed anywhere, it hadn't shown on his face or in his body. His eyes stayed locked on that invisible point a few feet ahead, breathing steady through the nose, out through the mouth, the way it always was when he was working alone. The pace didn't change at all. If anything, it felt more settled now, like the room's new tension was just another layer of air he moved through without noticing. People noticed that first, not with big reactions, but in the small ways attention drifts. One of the regulars who'd been repeating a form sequence under his breath slowed his count until the numbers stopped coming out loud. His eyes lingered on Bruce's feet longer than on his own, watching how the weight transferred without a wobble. Another student, still holding a towel around his neck from an earlier round, paused mid-wipe and let the cloth hang there while he stared. The visitor stayed rooted where he was, arms crossed tight across his broad chest, waiting. You could see the expectation in the slight forward lean of his shoulders, the way his head tilted just a fraction, like he was giving Bruce one more second to respond, maybe turn, maybe step closer, maybe say something sharp enough to restart the energy he'd tried to spark. But nothing came. Bruce finished the first side of the pattern, pivoted cleanly on the ball of his right foot, started the mirror image on the left side. Still no flicker in his expression, no shift in the calm line of his posture, no sign the words had registered beyond passing through the space. The silence stretched after that, not uncomfortable yet, but heavier than the room was used to. The visitor rocked his weight once heel to toe, then again, like the lack of reaction was starting to sit differently on him than he'd planned. One of the guys who'd come in with him exchanged a quick look with another visitor near the door. One raised an eyebrow, the other gave a small shrug, but neither spoke up. The regulars, though the ones who trained here week after week, they weren't glancing at the visitor anymore. Their eyes had settled on Bruce, on the same footwork sequence they'd seen him run dozens of times before, but now watching it with a different kind of focus, quieter, steadier, like the restraint itself was drawing them in. The room held there, attention slowly pooling in one direction without anyone forcing it.